Took a little longer than I thought, but hi everybody. Nice to see you on this rainy evening. I walked over here this evening, and I don't know if it's because I started the fall in an unheated cabin in Michigan, or if I then continued the fall with a camping trip in an unheated camper. But it doesn't really feel all that bad out. I'm actually kind of warm. Of course, I have like 20 layers on. Maybe that's part of it too. But anyway, I hope that you're warm and safe this evening. We got all kinds of cool things, as usual, that we're going to talk about. So let's see if we can get started. All right, enough of that. Let's start with what our topic was last week in the newspaper column, and that was bald-faced hornets. I don't know about you, but I've been noticing a lot of nests that have appeared in trees as the leaves have come down. Not that they just magically appeared; they've been there all along. But it's funny, bald-faced hornets, unless somebody gets stung during during the summertime. And become aware of them in that rather painful way, I usually don't hear anything from anyone about bald-faced hornets until now. When their activity is done, most of them are dead. If they're not dead yet, they soon will be because the majority of the colony does not survive the winter. Only the queens that they've raised do, and they're off overwintering underneath logs and in leaf litter. So these nests, just kind of appear and people freak out because they're usually good size. They're often described as being the size of a football or the size of a volleyball or the size of a basketball. And they are. The average bald-faced hornet colony is around 500 individuals. It sounds like a lot till you consider honeybee colonies are 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 60,000 bees. So, a hornet's nest, which is actually, these guys are actually in they're related to yellow jackets. They're a type of wasp. Hornet just kind of came along as a common name when they were naming things, but they are not a true hornet. They are actually a type of paper wasp. These things are really works of art. If you ever get a chance to examine one of the nests or even just a piece of a nest, we'll talk about pieces in just a minute, you'll see just how intricate these designs are. And it's not that they're trying to make them ornate, it's just all the different sources of wood that they use have different tones to them. Some more weathered wood is going to have kind of a whitish or grayish cast to it. Sometimes it'll be more reddish or brownish. And then layer after layer is built up. The wasp, look at the mouth parts on these things. So the wasp is, the mouth is kind of built for scraping, and they'll go off to sources of exposed wood. I suppose in nature they'd be going for a lot of bark and a lot of trees where the bark has fallen off, like a dead tree. But around here, a lot of times it's weathered fencing, weathered signing, or decks or sheds, those types of things. So we get quite a variety sometimes of colors of woods that appear in these nests. This photo on the right shows what you might see if you were to somewhat foolishly try to approach one of these nests in the summertime. These wasps will always post guards just inside the opening to the nest, which is usually at the bottom around here somewhere. And they, not only will they defend the nest, but they will also send out the alarm for reinforcements. So if you dare to get too close to one of these nests, you will find out that, yes, they can be mad as hornets. But if you don't approach them, if you don't beat on the nest or try to remove the nest, you can peacefully coexist with them all summer long. And that was kind of the point of the column, that, again, people freak out when they see this nest now and they want to spray it with all kinds of poisons. And really, at this point, it's best left alone, because look what happens. And this was a photo that was sent to me a couple of years ago by a reader. She said she noticed the nest as the leaves came off of this shrub that's in front of this tree. And she all of a sudden saw this big nest. And I said, you know, leave it for a while and see what happens. Because she was thinking maybe she needed to cut it down. And this happened actually within about a week of when she sent the first photo. The second photo shows how it's all torn apart. And again, you can see all the different striations here from the different sources of wood that were used to make this nest. But it got torn open. Now, was it, who did it? She wasn't sure. She was thinking it might have been a squirrel. She didn't actually see it happen. But squirrels, raccoons, lots and lots of different kinds of birds, they use these nests for food in the wintertime. I mentioned a lot of the individuals die, but they usually die in the cells or within the colony. There's also larvae in these cells that did not fully develop. So it's free food, it's free protein that's not going to be able to fight back now that it's gotten cold out. So if you happen to know of one of these nests that's nearby, please, if you can, just leave it, resist it. Now, I understand natural curiosity. I've cut a few of these down myself just so I could take it apart and see what was inside. That's okay. You know, if it's for educational purposes, go for it. But sometimes you can learn even more if it's within an easy viewing area. You can leave it up, and then you can kind of study all the things that make use of it. A lot of woodpeckers recognize these as food sources. Chickadees will come to them, especially once it's torn open like this till it gets fully emptied. You can see lots of different types of wildlife sampling the fine wares that are inside. Now, so as I was, I'd gotten a question from a reader who had wanted to know what he should do. He's a beekeeper, and he said that his policy was always if a bald-faced hornet nest showed up in his yard, he would always remove it. And I wasn't exactly sure how to answer that because I'm not a beekeeper, but I know people who are. So I kind of asked around and got there wasn't really a clear-cut answer, and that's so often the case in nature. There were some people who advocated for taking them down. They said, yes, these things, because remember, bald-faced hornets are predators, so they eat other insects, and yes, they will eat honeybees. But then somebody else said, well, that's, you know what, they don't eat that many honeybees. Remember, this colony might only have 500 wasps in it, whereas a honeybee colony has usually 20,000 bees or more. So the honeybees definitely outnumber the wasps. And then he also said that he will leave a bald-faced hornet nest up because they prey on wax moths. And wax moths are quite damaging. They can set up, if they get inside of a colony, their worms will eat you've heard of wax worms? Well, their caterpillars will eat the wax that's inside the bee's hive and create webbing. You know, it's a big mess. And so he looked at having bald-faced hornets around as kind of an insurance policy towards keeping the wax moths from getting into his hives. So there's kind of two sides to that story. But as I was researching that question, it's funny, I was just talking to my friend Valerie the other day. Some of you know Valerie Blaine. She's the now retired manager from Creek Bend Nature Center in St. Charles. And she said, isn't it funny how when you go to research something, usually the first things that pop up, especially if it's an insect or a rodent, is a pest control company. And the first thing that popped up when I was researching this question about do bald-faced hornets eat honeybees is this website. This is a website from a company in Western Pennsylvania around Pittsburgh called Pestco. And Pestco has a whole bunch of different blog entries about different things they kill. And I thought it was a spoof at first. I mean, this is a great picture. But this is the kind of fear mongering that goes on, and this is why people end up wanting to kill everything. So they listed these 9 different reasons, and I just kind of plucked out the first few. One says bald-faced hornets' nests are fearsome. Now, didn't we just talk about how pretty they are? Well, they talk about how big they can get. They can get to be the size of a basketball, and so that automatically equates to fearsome, I guess, if you're in the business of killing stuff. So they wanted people to be afraid, using language like that. And then they said bald-faced hornets are very aggressive. And I won't dispute that if you approach their space, which they say if you invade their space, they will attack you. But they say, unlike other stinging insects that may only sting when they feel extremely threatened, that's the same way as bald-faced hornets. If they feel extremely threatened, if you keep your distance, they're just like any other insect. They're going to keep their distance from you. Then they said the sting of a bald-faced hornet is wicked, and yes, it is. But I mentioned in my column, I've only heard about it all these years that I've been watching these insects and messing around with their nests, and I've always, gave them some respect, knowing that they could sting me. I've never gotten stung. It does, though, if you do happen to. Quick story. Over at Delnor Woods Park here in St. Charles, there was a bald-faced hornet's nest in one of the hedges, the shrubs that line the parking lot on the Wing Avenue entrance over on the east side. I opened a van door. We were teaching there. This was a couple of years ago. I opened the door of the Park District van, whacked the nest. They were angry, but they didn't come after me, or I'm not that quick. I'm sure they could have gotten me if they wanted to, but that's the closest I've ever come to being stung. And I should have gotten stung. I totally deserved it, but I didn't. So anyway, they use the word wicked, which again is kind of along that fear-mongering line of vocabulary. Then they say that they have a very good memory, which adds a new and horrifying dimension to their capabilities to harm humans. So this point number 4 went on to say that if you mess with their nest, they're going to remember you and they're going to seek you out. There might be research that backs that up, but I was getting pretty disgusted by point number 4. Well, then I get down to point number 6. Bald-faced hornets love to eat bees. Well, this is why that came up when I was researching that question about honeybees. And so I thought, well, this is interesting. I guess they eat more than I thought they did. Well, read what it says. Nearly 5 times the size of a typical honeybee, it only takes a small number of giant hornets to wipe out an entire honeybee colony. It is said that one giant hornet can kill roughly 40 bees a minute. So now they're not even, staying with the same species. They're talking about the giant hornets, the murder hornets that we all got fired up about a few months ago that were found out in the Pacific Northwest. These things are 5 times larger than a honeybee. And yes, they do raid honeybee colonies, and maybe one can kill roughly 40 bees in a minute. But it's not even the same species. So I don't know. If you have any friends in Pittsburgh, tell them to go to the Pesco website. This is what I did the other night. After I saw all this, I scrolled down to the bottom of the page, and there was a little box where you could fill in your name and email address and request a quote. So I filled it out. I did not request a quote, though. I just shared a little bit of my thoughts on how they're marketing their business. So anyway, Pesco in Pittsburgh, check it out. Nothing else, it's good for a laugh. And a sad commentary on how people view insects. Now, I wanted to back up here for just a second. Mike, you might recognize that table there. I was having a glass of wine with my dear neighbors this summer, and a bald-faced hornet actually fell in my wine glass. Probably had a good time while it was in there. And then I fished it out. Again, didn't get stung. And look at how, I would say this borders on cute or maybe even winsome, as she's just giving herself a little bath there, a little you know, fermented grape juice kind of a bath. But seriously, these insects, they're probably not something you want to be this close to all the time. This one, though, I think was had a little happy buzz going on, and was just fine. Right after I finished that video, she flew away, probably to tell all her nest mates about the great party over on 7th Court. Anyway, let's move along. So when is a fox snake not a fox snake? This actually refers to a column from a couple of weeks ago when I wrote about snakes moving into your house. And this is the photo that ran with it. This is, or may he rest in peace, this was Frankie, our fox snake at Hickory Knolls. Frankie passed away after a very long life. He got to the point where we didn't even use him for programming anymore because his back, his spine was so creaky with arthritis. We estimate Frankie was probably in his 20s when he passed away. But he's a representative of a native snake that lives in this area, a snake that sometimes can be found in basements and crawl spaces and garages as they're seeking shelter for the winter. Well, I got a call from a gentleman in Aurora who said that he found a snake. His friend found the snake, and the friend is not a huge fan of snakes and was a little dismayed to find this creature in his house. So he called this gentleman, Jeff, from Aurora, and said, Jeff, could you come over and, you know, give me a hand with this thing? So Jeff went over and picked it up, and he said it was quite docile. And he went and he set it up in, he went to the pet store and he got all the supplies for keeping a snake. And then he saw this article. And so he became kind of concerned that he'd taken a creature from the wild and, you know, was going to try and keep it as a pet. So I said, well, let's tell me a little bit more about the snake. And so he said, well, it was brown and splotchy. So I thought, okay, well, it might be a fox snake. I thought, well, the only other brown and splotchy snake we have around here is the northern water snake. And they're, as you can see here, that's my hand. They're kind of bitey, they're actually quite bitey. Jeff didn't get bit at all. So I thought, well, let's rule out water snakes. And I said, could you send me some photos? So he and his office mate took some photos and they texted them over. And here's the first couple of pictures. In quick glance, especially on my phone, I thought, well, that is a colorful fox snake. And then I started looking a little bit more. Let's go back here to Frankie for a second. So fox snakes, and this isn't really something you see on field guides references, but more often than not, a fox snake will have a dark stripe right here leading back from the eye. And they usually also have, almost looks like a little robber mask going across the front here. Yeah, it's not always, but it's usual. And you can take a look too at this pattern of the large blotches and then the smaller blotches and then the blotches that lead down to where the belly is. Now, fox snakes do have this pattern, a similar pattern on their belly as well, but they're just, something just wasn't quite adding up. See how these blotches are shaped differently? They're not as, they're more rectangular as opposed to oval shaped that we saw on Frankie. And then he sent me this photo, and I saw the side pattern and I saw this orange color. I said, is this pretty true? So sometimes, you know, fluorescent lights and things, they can play tricks with your eyes. He said, no, yeah, it's definitely kind of a golden color. Well, then it occurred to me, Jeff didn't find a fox snake. Jeff found a corn snake. It's probably a pet now, and pet corn snakes do get loose. Pet corn snakes also get let loose if somebody can't keep it anymore. Feeding a snake, can run into some money. It can cost a couple, $3, depending on where you buy your rodents from and if you're able to buy them in bulk or not. But you can invest a few $100s in frozen rodents to feed your snake. And then the equipment that's needed to care for them, the heat pads, or heat lamps. One or the other usually is enough for a corn snake, but some kind of litter, something for it to hide in, a lid so it can't escape. Maybe that's what was lacking in this corn snake setup. Anyway, so Jeff found a corn snake. I told this story to several of my snake-loving friends, and we all kind of said the same thing. Why can't this happen to us? So I guess I need to amend my story just a little bit from a few weeks ago. If you find a snake with splotches in your house, it might be a fox snake or a water snake. It might be somebody's escaped pet. Anyway, if we back up here, you can look in the background. Back over here, you can see that the snake has a wonderful setup with a tightly fitting lid. There's a heat mat underneath. And the snake has a name too. His name is Sherman. And this is actually in the office at A1 Landscaping in Aurora, Illinois. So kind of a cool story. I also mentioned last week that we would be looking at the question, do snowy owls have ear tufts? So this question, I encountered this one when I was reading up on the eruptive species that we looked at last week. We kind of focused on the finches, but snowy owls are another species that can erupt, IRRUPT, if their food source dwindles up north. Now these guys are known for eating rodents. Lemmings, I think, are on their diet plan. And if those numbers dip, then these owls are apt to come south. I understand there's already some that have shown up in Indiana this year, so we might be seeing some snowies here pretty soon. But I came across an article that was in the Toronto Ornithological Club's newsletter. It was written by Ron Pittaway and Gene Irons, who were also the couple that did the finch studies. They would do the predictions of finch eruptions. We mentioned them last week. Ron's now retired from that, but anyway, they had written this article about 10 years ago. Do snowy owls have ear tufts? And I'm gonna put that question out to you. What do you think? Do they? This is a picture of a snowy owl. Look here and look here above the eyes. In fact, let's zoom in a little bit more. Oh, yeah, wait a minute, here and here. Here's another individual. Here and here. It turns out that those are vestigial tufts. The snowy owl was once a solely North American species, and is thought to have had larger tufts at one time. Now, I should also mention, I keep saying ear tufts, and that's how they're referred to, but they're not actually where the ears are. The ears on owls are over here, kind of like where ours are on the side of the head, behind the eyes. But these tufts, there's lots of interesting theories of why they're there. The fact that they're reduced now in the snowy owl kind of speaks to the way its habitat preferences have changed as the world has gotten warmer. It's headed farther north. It's living in tundra areas a lot of times, or cold areas that it just doesn't need those tufts for the reasons that other owls do. There's quite a bit of debate as to why those feathers exist even on the tufted species. Let's explore that a little bit more. First of all, let's take a look at the name, the scientific name of the snowy owl. Bubo scandaicus. Well, I butchered that up. I'm going to try and say it without looking at it. Bubo scandaicus. Bubo, let's focus on Bubo. Bubo is the genus. Bubo is also the same genus as this owl's very close relative, the great horned owl, which is kind of famous for its tufts. It's actually named, the horned part of the great horned owl's name refers to those ear tufts. Now here's a juvenile, and you can see just the start of tufts here, kind of like what you see on the snowy. But then as this bird matures, the tufts come out to the sides. Now this owl has its tufts pulled back. And in fact, that's one of the theories of why these birds have these tufts, is for communication. This bird does not look terribly pleased. And that could be viewed as a threat posture amongst others of its species. Another theory is that these tufts are used for species recognition, that in low light conditions, they can see these tufts and they can move them around a little bit. There are muscles that control those feathers, so it could serve as a form of communication. Another theory is that they serve as a bit of camouflage. As these tufts are sticking up, it might help a sleeping owl look more like a jagged, broken off branch or snag in a tree. So yeah, there's lots of ideas of why these tufts exist, but I don't know that any one of them has any stronger following. I think they're all, you know, kind of got a good solid maybe behind them. And it probably, as so many things are in nature, it's probably a combination of reasons for why those are there. But Bubo virginianus, the great horned owl, and Bubo scandiacus, the snowy owl, are closely related. And yes, they both have tufts. So think about that when you go out on your snowy searches this winter. See if you can find some tufts. So we're going to stay with our bird theme. And those of you who are Three Stooges fans might recognize this clip. I'm not going to play it. But, you know, Curly was kind of famous for saying, oh, look at the grouse, when, you know, he would look up like that. We're actually going to take that in a slightly different direction now. You might remember a few weeks ago, I was up at the cabin in Michigan. Here it is. My cousin Jan actually sent me these pictures. This cabin has a brand new roof. And that in itself is kind of exciting because the cabin really needed a new roof. But that's not why we're talking about it tonight. When Jan went up to make sure that everything was all set for the winter, she noticed this. And when you've got a cabin in a fairly remote area and one of the windows is broken, that's not such a great thing. So she rather cautiously went in to investigate. And this is what it looked like on the inside. So it was not an inside job. It was definitely an outside job. Something came in, something or someone came into the cabin. So this is on the porch. Well, this is the door that leads from the porch into the cabin itself. And it too has broken glass. So my cousin Jan put on her detective hat and she looked a couple feet to the left and she saw this. Let's zoom in on that. When she sent me this photo, I at first thought, is that, it almost looked like a nighthawk, the way it was hunched over like this. But that would not be usual or typical or to be expected in early November in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I wonder, and then she sent me this picture, and there's the answer. This is a ruffed grouse. Turns out ruffed grouse, when they disperse, they can get a little wacky, they can get a little crazy. And you'll notice if we go back to those cabin photos, you know, a lot of the cabin has shutters over the big windows, but these porch windows are, they were added about 20 years ago. So the cabin was built in 1950. I still think of these as the new windows. There's no shutters over them. I suspect maybe this guy saw a reflection, or maybe thought that this was something that he could bust, or go through, and it was glass. He didn't get too far, and unfortunately, the grouse did not survive. And of course, had to find out, did cousin Jan save the body? And she didn't. She said she thought about saving a feather, but I guess she just laid the whole grouse to rest in the wooded area next to the cabin. But it got me curious about ruffed grouse. And so I started reading up on their habits. And it turns out that they have a very cyclical nature to their populations. They go up and down a lot. And it's about every 8 to 10 years that we see these peaks, and then they fall. This data is from northern Wisconsin. The cabin is actually just across the river from northern Wisconsin, so I thought this might be fairly valid in terms of what they're seeing. What this report noted was that the grouse population continues to have these peaks and valleys over this same approximate amount of time, but that the peaks are trending downward, that there's just not quite as many ruffed grouse as there used to be. In Michigan, so this is from the Michigan DNR, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time deciphering all these charts, but this is showing Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan, with Michigan's data being with the triangles. There was also some discrepancy. There was some bizarre notes in the study saying that the individual that was participating in these, what they were doing was they were counting the numbers of drums. These counts are done during the breeding season for the ruffed grouse. And ruffed grouse, the males beat their wings, and they call it drumming. That's part of their display to attract a mate. Not that unlike how a male prairie chicken will display and carry on to attract a female. But anyway, the populations are showing this same sort of up and down sort of nature. And I loved how they explained it. They said that there's many theories, including disease, weather, forest fires, sunspots, starvation, crowding, predators, genetic changes, and chance. So this was a study done in Michigan in 2017. There was actually a little bit more on the next page. They elaborate a little bit more on the poplar trees that produce the seeds that the ruffed grouse has a particular fondness for. Well, the poplars will have varying amounts of a chemical to deter the grouse from eating them. And that chemical, the amount of chemical that's present in the seed, goes up and down because some years they don't want their seeds dispersed, and other years, because that chemical comes at a cost for the tree to produce, they don't produce as much of it, and the ruffed grouse can then eat more seeds. Anyway, so there's lots of reasons for that. But it got me to thinking, what's the status of ruffed grouse in Illinois? I don't believe I've ever heard of one being in these parts. There's some in Ohio. They're actually an endangered species in Indiana. So I did a little bit of digging, and I learned that the Illinois Natural History Survey said that the ruffed grouse, or pheasant, as it is popularly known, is found throughout the state in wooded districts. Okay. So that was about 127 years ago. So they were around. Well, ruffed grouse, they have a preference for kind of shrubby, scrubby type of habitat. And is the cutting down of trees actually can favor them, because once trees are cut down and a bunch of brush, shrubby types of bushes pop up, that's the kind of habitat that they like. But then if we clear those out, as we're restoring our woods and getting rid of a lot of that, what we often term invasive growth, well, they don't like that so much. So our ruffed grouse population had declined after 1893. This, by the way, Illinois Natural History Survey, at the same time this 1893 report on ruffed grouse was issued, they also said, we're not going to write anything about prairie chickens because they're everywhere. They're so common, nobody needs to know about them. So I thought that was kind of interesting too, how the attitudes change over the years. But anyway, flash forward, in 1953, there was a reintroduction effort. Ruffed grouse from Wisconsin and Michigan were brought down to southern Illinois because they thought the conifers and whatnot that were growing in southern Illinois might be similar to the habitat that these birds had up north. And that didn't work. These birds dispersed pretty quickly after being released and were nowhere to be found. So they tried again 5 years later. This time they chose birds from a similar latitude. They went over to Ohio. And they also released these 31 grouse in Pope County. And they too dispersed and disappeared pretty quickly. So then another 5 years go by, and they brought in 55 grouse from Indiana in Alexander County, which is also in the southern part of the state. And that didn't work. They tried in Joe Daviess County, and that also failed. So by the 1990s, both the federal and the state wildlife officials said, you know what, we're just not going to do this anymore. So today, grouse are officially listed as extirpated. How about that? All right, so now, remember a couple of weeks ago, I'm going to stop the share here. I bought a new toy. This is the black light. I had a whole lot of fun going around the office here the other day, just trying to see what glows and what doesn't. I also did some research online. Remember we had looked at the flying squirrel, and we saw how there was a fluorescence, a really bright pink. And I don't know how well it shows up on the camera here on my laptop, but I mean, it's a glowing, bright, brilliant pink color. So I started, looking up other creatures that fluoresce, and it turns out the opossum does. I actually have an opossum pelt here. I don't have real high hopes for this working, but we're going to give it a try anyway. The article that I read about opossum fluorescence says that in live individuals, they actually, it looks like a rainbow of fluorescence. So, but they emphasize live. And I looked on my walk over here, not even the opossums wanted to be out in the rain tonight. So we're gonna give this pelt a try. I also have a fossil here, little remnant from when Illinois was an inland sea. We're gonna give that a try. And then I have some romaine lettuce that has chlorophyll on it. So we're gonna give these a try. Give me a second here. I'm gonna turn the light off. And I'm gonna turn this light on. All right. Let's, woo. All right, let's start here with the opossum. All right, well, actually that is kind of cool. Again, fluorescence in nighttime nocturnal mammals is not well understood. We don't know why it happens. Wow, well, we're getting some pinks and purples here. I suppose if it's this good with a dead, just a pelt, I wonder what it would look like with a live one. I'm going to put that on my list of things to find. Maybe I can borrow an opossum from a nature center. We'll see. We'll put that on hold for now. But we might come back to that. Now, here is the fossil. Oh gosh, I don't know if you can see because it's reflecting off my hand too. But this fossil is fluorescing pink and purple. Yeah, it's hitting my hand. But the minerals in the fossil are creating some really wild colors. If I get the angle on it better. You can kind of see the purples there. All right, well, maybe I need to wear a glove when I do this next time. But look at what happens when you hit, this is a green leaf of romaine lettuce, and it turns like a blood red color. Isn't that crazy? That's the wavelengths of light. Normally in full spectrum light, the green part of our light spectrum is being reflected. That's why the chlorophyll that's green in the leaf makes us, we're able to see the green because of the way the light behaves. But here, it's the red part of the spectrum that's coming off of this leaf, and it's just crazy looking. Right. You know, for $10 on Amazon, you can have an awful lot of fun with this black light. Let me turn this back on, regular light. Hold on. I wonder if they still sell those black light posters like they used to have in the 70s. I'll have to check that out too. Might have to redecorate Good Natured World headquarters here. All right, I had another update here. Where was it? We had talked a few weeks ago about witch hazel. And remember I had the branch and it was blooming. In fact, it is still blooming. If you get a chance to go out into, I believe there's some witch hazel. Well, I know there's definitely some behind Potawatomi in the Native Plant Garden, and we also have some blooming in front of Hickory Knolls. I want to say there's some at Northwoods. And of course, there's specimen plants here and there in the yards of native plant fanciers. But remember the seed pod? And I said that it was going to open once it got dried out enough. Well, I had this in a little bud vase in my kitchen, and I was really hoping that I would be around when it decided to pop open, and I wasn't. But I was lucky enough to find one of the seeds. So this is how a witch hazel plant will disperse its genetic material. That when this pops open, it's like a kind of a spring action that occurs, and the seed goes flying. Now, I don't know what happened to the other seed that was in the pod. I was only able to find this one. And I think it hit the top of the shelf where it was sitting. And so it didn't go very far. I kind of have a feeling I might have vacuumed up one of the other ones. And that was on the other side of the kitchen. So a good 8 feet or so away, 10 feet away. But it did open up. I'm going to see if I can get this, maybe chill it down over the winter and plant it in the spring, and we'll see if we can't start our own witch hazel shrub from this seed capsule right here. Looks like we got a couple of couple different chats here. Julie says, weird piece of trivia, that's what we're all about here at Good Natured. I discovered a nest in the dirt of a hanging fern when I was watering it. The next day, when I went out to check on it, the entire nest was gone and most of the dirt area was just empty space. I assume the hornets took their nest away piece by piece. That's really cool. I wonder if the hornets did it or if something else raided it and ate it. You know, I have trying to think, three or four different people this summer told me about having yellow jacket nests that they had become aware of, but hadn't gotten to the point where they were going to get rid of them. Yellow jackets, they're kind of close cousins of the bald-faced hornet. They're the yellow jacketed wasps that live in the ground, and they're a little ferocious, you know, especially if you step on the nest. They tend to take over rodent burrows, chipmunk burrows around here. Well, in these 3 or 4 different cases, something, and I'm thinking probably skunks, because skunks are pretty fabulous diggers, dug it up and ate it, and kind of took care of the yellow jacket problem. But I'm wondering, Julie, if it could have been something else that dug it out. Now, something else, birds will sometimes try to feast on these creatures too. I don't know, but that is a kind of a cool piece of trivia, that was there and now it's gone. Julie said the nest was not did not look disturbed at all. It was just the paper that was gone. And Kay said that hers was a skunk, and that she could tell by the scat. So that is kind of interesting, Julie. Just all the paper was gone. If it was, there are some birds that incorporate the paper into their nests, but I don't know if it was in springtime. I don't know. They have to be a pretty brave bird to take the paper away while the nest was still being used. Interesting. And then Sarah said that she just read recently that the puffin's beaks will light up with UV lights too. So if anybody knows of a local puffin, I've got the light. We could check this out too. Julie said all of the dirt was gone where the hornets had built the nest. Go figure. Yeah, that's just, I've actually researching game cameras, trail cameras, because there's so many things like this that come along, even in my own yard. I'm like, well, when the world happened here? How did I miss this? What, you know, trying to put the pieces together. Sometimes it's just easier to get the pieces as they come, so you can see it as it's happening. So I think in future programs, we might have some game camera footage, because I've narrowed it down to 2 different models, and hope to make that the Christmas present for myself. Okay, Greg and Kelly have a question. Extirpation and reintroduction. Is it very common for an extirpated species like a grouse to be attempted to be artificially reintroduced? And if so, is it very common for the effort to not be successful? That's a great question. Reintroduce and reintroductions, let's see. Generally speaking, when you introduce an animal into its new home, it's going to have some difficulty. Now, I'm going to take a little side journey here for a second. I may have talked a few weeks ago about trapping and relocating, and we're not talking about extirpated, rare, endangered species at all. We're just talking about the raccoon in your attic, or the squirrel that's chewed its way in somewhere where it shouldn't. Taking that animal in a trap and releasing it in a park or a forest preserve makes you feel good. but it's not so good for the animal, because you're releasing it in an area that's going to have other individuals of that same species, and there's going to be interactions, and that other animal is going to try and make its way back home. The animal that you've released is going to try and it's got a homing instinct. It's going to want to try and make its way back where it started, even if you drive it 5 miles away, like they say to do. Just don't do that. Call a professional. It'll probably have to end up being euthanized, but it's the best thing for that animal. So when you're dealing with an animal where there aren't other members of its species and you're releasing it into an area, sometimes they too will want to return to where they came from. I think, and I'll say this, Greg and Kelly, that I'm not a wildlife biologist, but using younger animals usually helps more than adults. Sarah just commented that the reintroduction did work for river otters. Yes, that's a very successful introduction in 2 different parts of the state. The ones that we hope will someday make their way into Kane County were reintroduced out by the Mississippi River, and have been kind of making their way east. I believe in that same area, trumpeter swans, there's a reintroduction effort that's going pretty well there as well. Barn owls, yeah, that one didn't work so well. DuPage County had tried that, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And they were using young animals, but those young animals were from, I think it was Louisiana. It was a southern state, and didn't fare quite so well. They were all collared or tagged, and they just kind of, some of them, the transmitters failed. One of them, I believe the transmitter fell off. Some of the individuals turned up dead. So that one didn't work so well either, but it can be done. But it needs a lot of guidance and oversight by wildlife biologists. Now those grouse, those ruffed grouse, I think when those reintroductions were attempted back starting in the 50s, going up through the 70s and early 80s, methods were different back then than they are now. And we've got a lot more technology to try and track these animals. But I think if the elements of the habitat that the animal requires are there, there's a greater chance for success. Now, we're actually preparing a program for next spring on barns and barn owls, because the habitat that they need, I don't think exists in this area the way, and we call them barn owls for a reason. They do like to nest, the modern day animals, as opposed to back when they were nesting in cavities. They will go into barn structures. Well, look at our landscape today, and how many barns do you see? Like I said, there's more to that reintroduction story that we were going to research for that program that's coming up, but that didn't work because there's elements of those barns and the agricultural practices that favored barn owls in this area 100 years ago aren't happening in the present day DuPage and Kane counties. Now, river otters, and actually, well, bald eagles weren't really reintroduced so much as they just benefited from the fact that our water is cleaner and our fish populations are healthier. I think that's something that's helped with river otters, as our water quality has improved and our fish population has improved. That's made things better for the river otters. Now, Illinois Audubon, I know, is involved in reintroducing some osprey. Now, osprey are kind of coming in on their own too. Again, because of that improvement in our water quality. But I know there was, I want to say a dozen, that was an Audubon meeting within the last couple of years. One of the individuals involved in that program had spoken on that effort of bringing, I think it was a dozen young osprey into Illinois. I don't have an update on that, but I think if the habitat is right, if the food and shelter requirements that they need are there, it can be more successful. That was a really long answer, Greg and Kelly. Sorry about that. But now, like with the ruffed grouse, I don't know that the habitat was exactly right. And so when there's components that they're looking for that are missing, it's probably not going to work as well as if the conditions are right, as we're seeing with the river otter. Julie wanted to know whether the prairie chickens are doing okay. That I don't know. I'd have to check on. I know they've been a little precarious year after year. I don't know what the numbers are. Usually it takes a year or so as they count these animals. But when you're dealing with a population of animals that you can physically count all of them up, you have to kind of do this for a while until you know that everybody is, until you can't count all the individuals that remain. Then you know you're starting to see some success. And yet Julie mentioned that barn owls might have been attacked by great horned owls. That's, great horned owls, and now we've got barred owls in this area too, and they are both pretty fierce defenders of territory. Julie said the one released at Fearsome Creek Fen showed up in Wild Rose area and then it disappeared. So yeah, predation and starvation, these can all, if you're dealing with captive raised stock too, that can then also affect the survival rate of those animals. Good questions, everybody. Does anybody else have any questions? Let's go back to river otters one more time. We're on the verge of winter, and winter of 2018 going into 2019, there were some very reliable river otter sightings around St. Charles, up by Tecawitha Woods and over in behind Primrose Farm. I think at that point the creek is Fearson Creek. I think it's south of Bolcom. It's where Fearson Creek joins it. Not terribly great habitat back there, but two otter were sighted fishing, pulling up fish from the water behind Primrose Farm. This was in January or February of early 2019. And then up by Tecawitha Woods, the otter was there for about a week. It was off of some private property just upstream from the bike bridge by Tecawitha Woods. So we've got another winter season almost upon us, and we've got a lot of hope going into winter time that things are going to start to get better for all of us. We've got a COVID vaccine on the horizon, and we might have river otters on the horizon too. Any other questions or comments? If not, really appreciate you spending the evening with us. Next week, we're going to be taking a look at another thing that's become quite apparent as the leaves have come down off the trees, and that's squirrel nests, also known as drays, and how they're built, how you can use some of those construction tips to aid your own survival. I've also got some holiday gift-giving tips that have a good-natured theme to them. So that, some reader emails, and who knows what else will happen before we meet again next week. Really appreciate your time this evening, and look forward to having a good-natured week, a good-natured Thanksgiving to all of you. See you next week.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
You too, Chris. Take care.
Thank you.
Nice to see you guys.
Thanks, Pam.
Hi, Laura.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good to see y'all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Pam. Good night.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
What?